So, Larry Elder destroys the Breakfast Club? Coming right up. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Conversations, Logic, and Reason. And as always, I want to say thank y'all for joining me today. So, I'm a huge fan of Larry Elder. Tell you, I've been a fan of Larry Elder really since I first heard about him pretty close to 20 years ago, about 20 years ago that I became a conservative. And he's partly responsible for why I am conservative today, or why I realize that I am conservative, because like most black people, I've always been conservative. But he did an interview, well, first of all, Larry Elder is running for president of the United States in the 2024 election. Again, he's trying to get the Republican nomination. And he's, as people typically do, they'll do interviews when they're running for the president. They'll do interviews around, and this is what he did on the Breakfast Club. Now, if you're not familiar with the Breakfast Club, it's a show that's hosted by a gentleman by the name of, who called himself Charlemagne the God. I believe he's the founding member of the show, but he's the face of the show, and he's pretty much been the one that's, well, I guess you could say he is the founder. I mean, like I said, I don't really watch the Breakfast Club that like talking about it. Here and there, I'll watch, interviews that they do. But he's pretty much the face of the Breakfast Club. And then there's DJ Envy. He's been there a while as well, so I think he's a contributor to the Breakfast Club. And like I said, I want to commend them because both of the gentlemen really had civil conversations with Larry to let Larry get his information out, bring out his points. So I will give them big ups to that, even though we know that they're straight up leftists. The show is absolutely straight up leftist. But the problem was this female host they also had on it by the name of, I believe her name is Taslin Fagaro, something like that. Never heard this female before until I saw this interview, which is one of the reasons why, like I said, I don't really watch the Breakfast Club like that. But anyway, this woman pretty much projected every negative stereotype that people have against black females. She was loud, masculine energy, combative. I mean, for every reason why black females are the least desired on dating apps. And every time people say, well, that's not true. The concept of the loudmouth black bitch, that ain't true, it's wrong, it's racist, you hate your mama black, and so on and so forth. They say this, but then turn around and they exhibit that characteristic. And that's what this woman did for the entirety of the interview, which you will see. Now, Larry Elder basically destroyed them. I mean, he literally reduced the Breakfast Club down to a continental breakfast. That's how lopsided it was. And like I said, this interview was like 1 hour and 6 minutes long, so I'm definitely going to have to do multiple videos to cover everything, especially the stuff that I want to cover, because there was a lot of information, a lot of subjects talked about, and there was a lot of evidence I talked about black people being brainwashed. Well, this interview is, like I said, just more proof of how brainwashed that so many black people are, how brainwashed by the race narrative. But anyway, y'all, without further ado, let's go to the interview.
Likely to end up in jail. What's happened? In the mid-'60s, with I think the best of intentions, a Democrat named Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. And since then, we have incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. When I say this to people, the pushback I get is, there are lots of things that are going on, systemic racism, poverty. Here's the problem. If you look at a young black male aged 10 to 43, that's young to me because I'm 71 years old. A young black man in that demo is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man, same demo. Young black man, real young, 19 and under, the number one cause of preventable death is homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black male. Same demo for whites, the number one cause of preventable death is unintentional deaths. That includes drug overdoses, automobile accidents.
Let me ask you a question. What do white people do wrong?
So I guess the answer to Charlemagne's question about what do white people do wrong, I guess it will be the same wrongs as everybody else. I mean, white people are human beings. with the same strengths, same weaknesses as any other race of human beings groups. But Larry Elder just ran down a whole bunch of stats and a whole bunch of data and of what's really wrong with the black community and why he's getting into the race to highlight these problems that's not being highlighted on either side. And all all Charlamagne can do was just bring up, well, what do white people do wrong? And I pretty much, he gave the same exact answer that I would. Why am I worried about white people? Okay, if white people are supposed to be the dominant society, they much better shape than we are. Why are we as black people worrying about what they do wrong? It's not stopping no black person from doing achieving anything. So why would I waste my time and energy worrying about what white folks doing? Black people worrying about what white people do wrong will be the equivalent of a person who's up to their neck in it, and they're worried about the person who's up to their knees in it. Okay, you got your own problems. You have far bigger problems. You need to be worried about your own problems and not worrying about what somebody else's problems are. Now, the reason why Charlamagne brought this up, if people didn't realize it, was essentially what he was doing, the same tried and true tactic that so many other these black people do, blame shift. Always trying to figure out some type of way of taking all the real problems facing blacks in America and blame shifting it to white people. So that's pretty much what he was doing there. And Larry Elder pretty much addressed it. But he was basically doing nothing but trying to blame white people for, try to blame shift some of the issues in the black community that Larry Elder brought up on white people. And this is what black people always do. And one of the main reasons why we never get anywhere in this country. Americanized black people is too busy being victims as opposed to being victors in this country.
Tell me what you think the number one systemic example of systemic racism is in America.
Oh man, there's so many.
Just give me the most important one you think.
But at the top of mind, I'll probably maybe say mass incarceration. Maybe.
Really?
Now, I say that redlining is the number one example of racist rhetoric that you will run into from these blacks, but this is the one that they repeat the most. And that is true. Well, if that's the case, then I would have to say mass incarceration would have to be number two. And it's just amazing how when it comes down to all this racist rhetoric, these black folks, they just blurt it out. It's almost like a knee-jerk reaction. It's almost they're unconscious. They're unconscious when they do so. It's an unconscious act from black people. And that just goes to show you, that's just a testament of how brainwashed black people are with the race narrative, the race nonsense. But anyway, my response to mass incarceration is always the same. If you have a problem with the mass incarceration, stop the mass crime. Black people commit mass crime. You can't go out here and commit mass crime and then cry about the mass incarceration. That'd be like somebody go run out in the rain, pouring down raining. They go run outside, no protection for inclement weather, no umbrella, no raincoat, and then complain about their soaking wet. If you have a problem with the mass incarceration, with that so many black people always cry about, then stop the mass crime, address the mass crime that black people commit. There would be no mass incarceration.
Mr. Elder, quick question. Let's just remove the word racism, since that seems to be a word that triggers, a conversation down the water hole. Let's just focus on the word system.
Okay.
You mentioned that the system was the one that discouraged. And again, we have no problem with agreeing that the family, the black family, should certainly has some room for some improvement. But let's just focus on system.
Room for improvement?
System. Well, we're not going to go down that water. We're not going to go down that water hole. Let's get to the question. So the question is, you said that the system encouraged black women to be single mothers, correct?
I said the welfare state, yes.
The welfare, the system. So who's in
Okay.
charge of the system? Who was in charge of the system?
Well, it was Democrats that passed it.
And who were Democrats? Were they black or white at that time?
Well, at the time, majority of black people were Democrats, as the majority of black people are Democrats now.
Not the voters. I'm talking about the system. Remember, the main idea is the word system. Who was in charge of the system at the time? The Democrats at the time, the system. I'm just going to Charlamagne's point about white or black. Was it white Democrats in charge of the system or black Democrats in charge of the system?
Well, if you're prepared.
Right? In comes Taslin with the angry black female narrative. Now, she comes in and she wants to, with a combative attitude and disrespectful attitude, she wants to remove race from the discussion because it seems to be such a contention for Larry. She then turns around and add race right back into the discussion by asking who's in charge of the system. And frankly, it really truly doesn't matter who's in charge of the system. The only thing that matters is, can you freely operate within that system? And when it comes down to black people and really everybody in America, the answer is yes. There's nobody in America who cannot freely operate within the system. So if that's the case, what does it matter who's in charge of the system? Who's in charge of the system is irrelevant. So if you focus all your energy on whether or not black people are in charge of some said system, then you're going to waste a lot of time. Now, all the people who always say this nonsense, about systematic racism and all this nonsense, I always ask, what job, what income, what lifestyle, what career path, what occupation, okay, which sector of society that black people are being barred from participating in on the basis of just being black. Is there a city that black people can't live in? Is there a state that black people barred from moving to just because they're black? You're telling me that as black people, we can go to Disney World, but we can't go to Six Flags? It's ridiculous. There is no systemic racism, and there's no evidence of any systemic racism. And Larry always proves this to be the case. Now, as far as the welfare state that she's talking about, that supposedly the white Democrats put on black people had to willingly participate in this. Okay, L.B. Johnson did not put a gun to any black female's head, forcing her to take the welfare. Black female chose the welfare over the black man, right? So yes, LBJ was white, yes. But just because he was white does not mean you had to take the welfare. And I always say, when everybody was talking about they ship drugs in our community, well, did somebody put a gun to your head, forcing you to smoke the crack? Somebody put crack in your mailbox, in a crack pipe, and you had to smoke it? No, you made a conscious decision to smoke that crack. They don't blame that on the drug dealer. If those drugs are in your community, you would just dispose of them. So again, they love to blame ship, and it's the white man who controls the system. And if you notice that this is the argument that she pretty much stuck to, even though it's a stupid argument, because like I said, she's not being held back in the system. DJ Envy is not being held back in the system, and Charlemagne the God certainly is not being held back in this system. So that's nonsense. The system.
When you see the mass shootings that happen, majority of those people are white males. What do you think about that? No, you
mass
specifically
shootings.
Talked about the smash and grabs, though. So I was saying, since you're using that as an example, I'm saying, well, what about the mass shooters that are usually white males?
One more time. They are usually white males because 60% of the country is white. However, they underrepresent in terms of the number of mass shootings.
And more brainwashing from Charlemagne here. Now, obviously he doesn't know the stats that black people commit more mass crimes than white people, or at least at a higher rate than white people. I mean, we see, the definition of a mass shooting, which he clearly doesn't know, is basically if you have 3 or more victims. This is pretty much, I guess, the standard definition that we use, the standard meaning. Now, the FBI really doesn't have a standing definite meaning of what a mass shooting is, but this is pretty much what most people go by. 3 or more shootings, and if that's the case, black people committing mass crime at a far higher rate than anybody. I mean, we see mass shooting going on in Chicago all the time. They just don't report on it. Like every other weekend, there's a mass shooting, pretty much in inner cities where black people are, and that's a black people problem. It's not no damn white people are these mass shootings. Because as Larry Elder said, if you watch the full interview, white people underrepresent when it comes down to mass shooting, and we way overrepresent. And obviously it would have to be, if we are 15 or 13% of the population, which I'm hearing being reduced to 12, and we're responsible for 50% of the murders, well, obviously we have to overrepresent when it comes down to mass shooting as well. So obviously this is another thing that Charlemagne has been brainwashed with, but he's not up on the facts.
87% of blacks live below the poverty line. This is before Brown versus Board of Education.
Probably
You
because we
did
had no
not
choice.
find these kind of black on black crime.
Probably because we had no
But they
choice
still
but
were
to do it
living
ourselves.
below the poverty line, though, sir.
I'm sorry?
You're forgetting the fact that they were still living below the poverty line. You're picking and choosing, saying this was good, but this was bad.
Okay.
The bottom line, they end between the poverty line. But let's move forward
Well,
on
let me.
system.
Okay.
Now, Taslin tries to throw out this that, well, they were under poverty, which is the reason why they weren't committing mass crime. But they always say, these blacks, these racists are always saying that poverty causes crime. Now, if poverty causes crime, then shouldn't the crime rates among black people have been higher back then when we were under much higher poverty rates than we are now? But we see a complete inverse flip. So then how can anyone say that, well, poverty, because they were under poverty back then and they weren't committing crime? So they just defeat their own narrative about poverty causing crime here. In other words, the poverty causing crime defeats their argument, so they drop it and go away from it. And this is something that you could consistently hear from people on the left. As soon as something, they'll push a narrative, and as soon as that narrative defeats their argument, they'll flip it on you. And the thing is, the worst part about it is that all three of those people, Har, Charlemagne, and DJ Envy, will be the first person to cry about poverty causes crime as soon as it becomes convenient for them. But no, it has nothing to do with black people living below the poverty line. Well, we had families, okay? There's less black people living below poverty today, and we have more crime than ever as black people in this country. So you can't say that poverty causes crime, and you can't say that, well, they were living below the poverty line. That's a ridiculous circular argument. Again, proving again that this woman doesn't know what the world she's talking about. She shouldn't have been on the show, because she just dragged the interview down with a whole bunch of nonsense. Now, as far as with Asians, you know, I always say that if like I say, if coming out of poverty, as they're trying to make here, cause you to commit more crime, then Asian people will be committing the most amount of crime because they have the least poverty rates amongst Asian people. This is a stupid argument. Like I said, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I don't know why this woman is even on the show, because I've seen other shows that she did, you know, prior to watching the Larry Elder show and listen to her, and she just drags the conversation down, and she just keep pushing that loudmouth black bitch stereotype. She just keep projecting it, because that's all people see when they hear her.
Things have always been under attack by white supremacy. You can go back to things like whether it's the Tulsa race massacres. Like every time black people do create these systems that are our systems and we are the entrepreneurs, it seems like white supremacy finds a way to destroy it.
Every time, look.
And here in come more racist rhetoric. This is, you know, Charlemagne with this, every time we build it stuff, they try to tear it down. This is, like I said, this is very common racist rhetoric that so many blacks have been brainwashed with. But had I been on the interview, the first thing I would ask, because anytime I'm faced with that question, the first thing I ask whatever black person is, what have they taken from you? What have they torn down from you personally in your life? You know, Charlemagne, are the white people tearing down the Breakfast Club? Are they taking the Breakfast Club from you? The answer to that question is no. You know, when you hear black people make that argument, it's always based on events from 100 years ago, 80 years ago, stuff from a time period that's far different than what it is today. You know, they always talk about, you know, the bombing of Black Wall Street that happened 102 years ago. How is that relevant to today? I mean, America is a far different place 102 years later than it was back then. There's no systemic racism that's holding black people down today, but they still keep crying that nonsense. That's why I don't never deal in group collective oppression. Whenever these blacks start crying about racism, I need you to tell me how it's stopping you. Don't live through somebody else's oppression. But nobody's tearing down nothing. And if any black person believes this, could you please point out to me something that black people built in the last 20, 30 years and explain to me how white folks just came in and tear it down every time we try to build something? The problem is we ain't building nothing. And the fact that they have to keep going way back in the past. That just speaks volumes.
I never came close. I never came close to saying there was no racism.
You just said you don't think it's systemic racism.
Not anymore. Obviously, there was. We had something called slavery. We had something called Jim Crow.
That destroyed black. Hold on, sir. That was system that destroyed. That was the system that destroyed Black Wall Street. It's the same.
Okay, first off, let me say that Black Wall Street was not torn down because of a system. Anybody who says that Black Wall Street is evidence of system to stopping black people and tearing black people down, is somebody that don't know nothing about no Tulsa race riots. They just repeat nonsense what somebody told them. Okay, what happened in the Tulsa race riot was it was an angry mob of white people, was not no system. An angry mob of white people were upset because a black man got off of supposedly disrespecting a white woman in the elevator. That's what it was. It was not the system. The system had nothing to do with it. So no, that's not systemic racism. That was a bunch of angry, racist white people who were getting racist, who were racist back then, that burned in shops and burned the town down. Wasn't no system behind that. But anyway, Larry Elder does not believe in systematic racism or any system against black people. And there is no system against black people because nobody gives any evidence of it. She gives no evidence of it. And Charlemagne gives no evidence. Nobody ever give any evidence. They just regurgitate race rhetoric, which is easily debunked and destroyed. So you basically can't make a correlation between the connection that Donald Trump is making, how the system is unfairly treating Donald Trump, as opposed to how Hillary Clinton got off. You know, they sent her a subpoena requesting her to send a service. She bleached the service and told them they don't need it. Got off from that. You're talking about should be in contempt. And of course, surprise, surprise, every time we get information about the Bidens and with the corruption in Ukraine and Hunter Biden receiving millions of dollars from Ukraine, interest in Ukraine, every time some information comes out about that, the mainstream media jumps on this, we're going to prosecute Trump's narrative. And that's all this is. They have no evidence that Trump did anything. This is ridiculous. This whole episode with Donald Trump is ridiculous, and all the people involved needs to be arrested for malicious litigation. But like I said, there's no comparison whatsoever between how Trump is being unfairly treated by our political system and black people. The correlation she's making here is ridiculous. There is no systemic racism holding her down, holding black people down. The only thing holding black people down, the only systemic thing that we need to worry about is systemic victimhood and the mindset that's between black people's ears. That's the problem.
Let's take Chinese Americans. Chinese Americans were the first ethnic group to be excluded with an Immigration Act in the late 1800s. They had riots against Chinese in LA, in San Francisco. There were laws that prevented Chinese Americans from participating in the laundry business. I'm in California. California, of course, rounded up Japanese Americans during World War II. There were laws that prevented Japanese Americans from owning farmland. The average Japanese American household has a higher per capita income than the average white household. The average Chinese American household has a higher per capita income than the average white household. How does that happen? It happens because of a strong belief in family. It is rare for a Chinese American or a Japanese American kid to have a child outside of wedlock, and a strong belief in education and a strong belief in entrepreneurship. These are the kinds of qualities that make people successful.
You can't blame So in our communities, heavy food deserts. There's nothing but fast food places that are just killing and destroying that. Would you say that's true?
Okay, there's a reason why it's easier for Asians to get loans. That's because Asian people have good credit. No, they have great credit. I mean, they have the best credit rating in America. Now, obviously, you know, I've said this before, Asians is a diverse group. You know, when people say Asian, they're thinking Orientals, you know, Japanese and Chinese, something like that. But there's a lot of people that fall under the banner of Asian. But regardless, they're doing so very well in America economically. Especially Indians, boy, Indians are absolutely killing it in America. Absolutely killing it in America. And they're not in charge of no system. What system do Indians run? But they're doing so well in this country. So, but black people, on the other hand, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes down to credit rating. And as I've said, the credit rating, it has nothing to do with your skin shade. Has nothing to do with no system. It has to do with your behavior. And black people have basically crappy behavior when it comes down to how we handle our credit. As I said, you know, a lot of these kids, were raising up with these hood mamas, they credited in the negative before they even become an adult because a mama putting stuff in their name. You don't see this happening with any other race of people. And the only people who have worse credit standing than black people in America. And when I say credit standing, that means everything, including your credit rating, your collateral, your behavior, not just what your credit rating is. Your credit standing is more than just your credit rating. But we're only better than Native Americans, and they're living on reservations. So there's a reason why Asians are getting these loans easier, because they do the things that's going to require them to get the loan. They have good credit in their behavior. The behavior that they exhibited gives them good credit. Again, this is all matter of personal behavior and not skin shade, because then if there was all these racist white people in this white dominant society, why would the white dominant society let Asian people outperform them? Again, it makes absolutely no sense. Hell, even Nigerians are outperforming white people per capita. But anyway, as far as these food deserts, again, this is more brainwashing these people. There's more evidence that black folks, brainwashed black people, love to focus on the what, never the how or why. Okay? Now he's complaining about in the inner city areas where black people are, they don't have a lot of grocery stores where people can go to buy fresh food, and not only that, where they can cook basically more nutritious meals at home. They have to go to nothing but fast food. The problem is that black people need to stop stealing. Again, it's the same thing with the poverty, the issue I discussed earlier about the poverty causing the crime and the crime causing the poverty. There's no evidence to say that one has caused the other, but we do know that black people are stealing in these stores, making it unprofitable for the store. Matter of fact, a bunch of Walmarts start closing down in Chicago, and all the black people are losing their mind crying about what they gonna do, what we gonna do. Well, what you can do is you get with these N-words, these ninjas, and tell them to stop stealing. Start raising civilized human beings, and they won't be stealing, and then it will be profitable for people to have stores in your area. And there's another article I read about a store called Giant Grocery was contemplating shutdown in Southeast DC because of the same thing. Black people stealing in the stores. Stop stealing out of these people's stores. Stop shoplifting. And then these stores will be profitable. I don't know what it is. It's like when these N-words, when they heard we need to uplift, they must have heard we need to shoplift. Because this is what they're doing in these stores. And then nobody has an obligation to bring any store into your community. Anything into your community. You want them to bring an establishment into your community, you need to give them the incentive to do so. And for one, you can stop stealing out the stores. And if those stores can be profitable, they're not going to be there. And it's sad how they, like I said, they cry about this whole food desert narrative, but they never address why it's happening. They never talk about the theft that black people do that's causing the food desert. They just cry about the food desert.
Boy.
You say that's true. I'm just asking a question.
You said a number of things. I just addressed one of them about loans. Mm-hmm. In 1965, Barack Obama, who was in private practice, joined a bunch of other lawyers to file a class action lawsuit against Citicorp, which is headquartered here in New York. 186 black people were applying for loans for mortgages and didn't get them. And they accused Citicorp of engaging in racism. Mm-hmm. Citicorp said, no, it's not racism. You have poor credit scores, and we want to make sure we get our money back. Obama joined a bunch of other lawyers, and they sued Citicorp in a class action lawsuit. And Citicorp said, okay, to hell with it. Gave them all loans. And they followed them all up. Daily Caller did a few years later. Almost all of them lost their homes. Several of them filed for bankruptcy. One of them even said, when you don't qualify for a loan, maybe we shouldn't get a loan. Well, duh. It wasn't true that black people were not getting loans. Plus, there are all sorts of black-owned community banks around the country, and it turns out the turn-down rate when you apply for a loan at a black community bank was even higher because they had less capital and they couldn't afford to loan money to risky people. It is just not the case that the reason for the plight of the black community is because people were not lending money to them. It's just not true.
That's not true, but
All of this black people denied loan nonsense is backed up by nothing but feelings. Amazing me that they always got these studies, these studies that say that black folks are being denied loan. And then it's like the more issues we bring up on all the factors, every time you bring up factors, when these leftists, when they bring up these studies, every time we bring up factors that goes along in the process, then they always say it accounted for the study. Now all these studies saying, well, yeah, even if you account for credit rating, black folks are still getting denied at a higher rate than what white people are, even though Asians people are being approved at a higher rate what white people are, if they really truly with all these systemic racist white people. And again, it has to do with black people's behavior. But Larry Elder basically gave you a story here, an example, perfect example, and not just a study, but an example of why black people being denied for loans wasn't because of racism. As y'all see, like I said, it's an example of why black people are going to be rejected at a higher rate than white people, because black people do operate in behavior that's basically going to cause black people to have worse credit. Generally, they don't pay their bills on time. You know what I'm saying? They don't pay their bills. And they tend to operate based upon show. When I talk about the ghetto mentality, they operate based upon quick gratification, living for the day, very little emphasis on delaying gratification so that they can have better in the future. Again, they're like children. And what happens when you give children the credit card? Or any irresponsible people or people with childlike mentalities? Well, they're going to charge it out. They're going to max the card out. And they're going to have bad credit. So, like I said, this whole idea of all these studies show that black people are being turned down. I guarantee you, Charlemagne is not being turned on. He can't give me a personal story of how he's being denied. He was denied loans because of race. And DJ Envy can't do it, and I'm pretty sure this Taslim chick can. But they're always living through everybody else's oppression. This is, again, one more reason why you never allow group collective oppression. If all these blacks want to cry about all this oppression, then you let them tell you how they personally are being impacted by whatever excuse they give, whether it be mass incarceration or denied loans or more time for the same crime, whatever it is. Let them tell you how it's affecting them personally. And if there's all this systemic racism, you should be able to tell me how the systemic racism is impacting you as an individual. But anyway, this is it pretty much for this video. I'll do a part 2, and it's probably going to require me to do maybe 4 parts to cover everything that was said in this interview, because the interview was 1 hour and 6 minutes. But I'm definitely going to do it because there's a lot of important things I would like to highlight that was in this interview. I mean, this interview pretty much basically proves a lot of the things that I say about black people. Thomas Sotomayor, the things that he say, they'll attack him, get him silenced, but here's the proof of what this man has been saying about black people for years. But anyway, y'all, this is part 1, and as always, 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 until next time.